Hello everyone, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to our webinar today all about maternity pay in Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'll be hosting the webinar today and I am joined in the background by my colleagues Ollie and Laura, who are both on hand ready to answer your questions. Let's take a look at what we're going to cover in the webinar. So we'll begin with an introduction to statutory maternity pay, and we'll let you know about the current statutory rates for the higher and standard rate. We're then going to go into a demonstration on how to record maternity details in Sage 50 Payroll. So I'll show you a few different ways and a handy report you can run with the maternity details. We'll then show you how to check the SMP amount in Enter Payments and make adjustments to other payments, either using the Make Up Basic option or by doing manual adjustments. And then we'll take a look at the process at the end of the month when it comes to reclaiming the statutory payment, how that all works, and the employer payment summary submission that you'll need to do in order to report the amounts reclaimed. And we're going to finish with a couple of troubleshooting tips, highlighting a few issues that sometimes come up with maternity pay, how to avoid those issues or how to resolve them if you do come across them. And then hopefully some time at the end just to keep the webinar open for you to have a look through the Q&A. So let's get straight on with our introduction to maternity pay. So we are going to be focusing on the statutory maternity pay. So SMP stands for statutory maternity pay, and this is the minimum amount that you need to pay to your employees who are taking time off work to have a baby. Now it is paid at two different rates. You have 6 weeks at the higher rate, which is the equivalent of 90% of your employee's average weekly earnings, followed by 33 weeks at the standard rate, which is for the new tax year, 2024 to 25, £184.03 per week, or 90% of average weekly earnings if that's lower. So this will all be calculated automatically once it's been set up in the software. But for an employee to qualify for SMP, they do need to meet the eligibility criteria. So a quick look at those on the current slide, and this is taken from the gov.uk website. So employees must be on your payroll in the qualifying week. That is the 15th week before the expected week of childbirth. They need to give you the correct notice. So that would be 15 weeks before the due date. They need to give you proof that they're pregnant. So that's the MAP B1 certificate or equivalent that they get from the doctor or midwife. They need to be continuously employed for at least 26 weeks up to any day in the qualifying week, and they do need to earn at least £123 per week gross in the 8-week relevant period. So that is the 8 weeks leading up to the qualifying week. So a quick look at the key dates involved in SMP calculations. So we're going to count back from the due date, also known as the expected week of confinement or EWC. And if we go back 15 weeks, that takes us to the qualifying week. And then if you count back a further 26 weeks, that takes you to the latest start date for the employee to qualify for this payment. So they need to be employed by you for at least 26 weeks leading up to their qualifying week. The 8-week period leading up to the qualifying week is where the average weekly earnings are calculated, and that will determine the higher rate of SMP. And the earliest date that leave can begin is 11 weeks before the due date. But if the baby does arrive before that point, SMP will start immediately on the birth of the child. 4 weeks before the due date, if the employee is off sick with a pregnancy-related sickness, they would need a transfer from SSP to SMP, even if they plan to do that a little bit later. And then they'll be able to take, as I say, up to 39 weeks of paid leave, or 52 weeks in total, if they want some unpaid leave after that. So those are your key dates. We just also want to mention in this introduction that it is possible for you to reclaim any statutory parental payment. So most employers would reclaim 92% of any maternity, paternity, adoption, shared parental or parental bereavement pay that has been paid out. However, if you qualify for small employers relief, you are able to reclaim a higher percentage, so you get 103% of the payment, so 100% of the statutory pay and 3% known as NI compensation. Now, you do usually qualify for this if your total Class 1 national insurance contributions are £45,000 or less in the tax year prior to the qualifying or matching week. So we recommend that you check your eligibility for small employers relief each year. So as we've moved into a new tax year, now's a good time to check to see whether you still qualify for this in the new year. So I do want to quickly show you where that setting is, because it's important that you set this up before you process a statutory payment so that you reclaim the correct amount. So if I just bring the slides down, I just want to show you how you can find the total Class 1 national insurance for a previous tax year. So it's really simple to do. First of all, set your process date back to the last day of the previous tax year. So in my case, the 5th of April, 2024. And then either from the payroll links, you can run your P32 report from here, or if you go to the main reports option into the period end folder, you've got the form P32 employer payment record. So this is the report you usually run at the end of the month to work out your payment at HMRC. But if we run it for month 1 to 12 for the previous tax year, it'll confirm our gross national insurance. So this is your total Class 1 national insurance. And in my case, because it's less than that £45,000 threshold, I do qualify, and I still qualify for small employers relief. So now that I've checked that, I can set my process date back to my usual pay date, my next pay date. And then if I go to the company tasks and then click into settings, here on the details tab, towards the right-hand side, you'll find the checkbox eligible for small employers relief for 2024 to 25. And as you can see, I've already come in and ticked that box because I did this check just after I finished year end. So that will mean that I do end up reclaiming the correct amount of statutory parental pay. So that's reclaiming it, and you'll see how that works later on in the webinar. But what we're going to cover next is recording the maternity details. So I'm going to give you a demo of this, and I'll show you a couple of different ways you can enter the required information. But there's a couple of things that you'll need in order to record the maternity details. So number one, you'll need to know what date your employee wants to start their maternity leave, because you'll be entering their last day of work, so the day before that date. And you'll also need the medical evidence. It's usually the MAP B1 certificate that confirms the baby's due date. So as long as you have that information, you do have everything you need to set up the payment. So let's now take a look at how you do that in the program. So first thing I'm going to do is set my process date to the next pay date. So in my case, I pay my employees on the last day of each calendar month, and I've already changed my process date to the 31st of May. And the first way I'm going to show you of entering maternity details is using the quick SMP screen. And to use this, you start by selecting the relevant employee. So I've selected employee 1 in my list here. And then if you're on your payroll tasks, have a look in the links section for recording maternity, this link just here. Or if you can't see any links and you can't resize them, you can also go to the employee tasks and you'll find the same option, recording maternity, from the tasks on the left. Now, when you click onto this option, it takes you into the quick SMP screen, and this is where you can enter all the information needed to calculate the maternity pay. So you start by ticking the box confirming you've received the medical evidence, and then from that evidence, you would enter the baby's expected date of birth. So in this case, it's the 25th of May. Once the due date is entered, you can click onto Check Entitlement, and you can see that Payroll does some checks in the background to establish if the qualifying conditions have been met. So it's ticked that we've received the evidence. It's ticked that the employee has worked long enough. And it's also checked the average earnings, and we know that they earn enough. And you can see some of the key information here on the right-hand side. So you can see the average weekly earnings that have been calculated are £461.54. And then we've got key dates, so due date, the qualifying week, so that's the 4th of February, the latest start date to qualify, so they need to be employed on or before the 19th of August, and then the set period where the average is calculated, 11 weeks before the due date. And if we just put in the employee's last day of work, so we know that they want to start, they're going to finish on the 17th, so they'll officially start their SMP on the 18th of May. So I'm going to put the 17th in as the last day of work. And once I've done that, it sort of populates the rest of the dates. And if I take the full entitlement, the last day of paid leave is going to be the 14th of February next year. So that's everything entered that we need. The actual date of birth and return to work date can be added later on. And you'll see that the entitlement due has been displayed at the bottom of the screen here. So it is that 6 weeks at the higher rate. So this number here is 90% of the average weekly earnings. And then that will be followed by 33 weeks at the standard rate. It's £184.03. Now, if you're wondering how the average earnings have been calculated, you can check this by clicking on Earnings During Set Period. And you'll see, in this case, leading up to the qualifying week, I had 2 monthly payments. And that is how the average has been calculated. So it's annualized those payments and divided by 52 to give us this weekly average figure. But if for any reason you need to amend the average figure, it can be overwritten at this point. One last thing I want to mention on this screen is that you can print a summary of this information just by using the print option at the bottom. So that'll go straight to your printer, but to show the information it contains, shows the main qualifying conditions have been met, displays the average earnings, all of those key dates that we just went through, and then the statutory entitlement. So this might be quite useful for your own payroll records, or even maybe to give to your employee. So I'm going to save these details and then click on to close. And all of that is now recorded within the employee's record. So that's one way to enter the details, the recording maternity link. The other way to do it is by entering the details on the absence tab in the employee record. So I'll just show you where that is. If I open the record and then click onto absence, you'll see under the diary there's an SMP button. And when I click on this, you can fill in the same information here, although it's already recorded because I recorded mine in the quick SMP screen. But you'd enter your due date, born on date when known, last day of work, so 17th of May. You would need to click Auto Calc if you're doing it this way to populate the average weekly gross pay and tick the medical evidence box. And then you can see how the average was calculated. Again, you can check the full entitlement. So this is the same information that we saw on the quick SMP screen. And it also shows you the amount payable in the current period. So from the start of maternity pay period, I've got 2 weeks due up to my pay date. So whichever way you choose to enter that information, once it is entered, it means that the maternity pay will calculate automatically until either the return to work date or the full 39 weeks has been paid. And if I just return back to my payroll tasks, and I've already set my process date to the 31st of May, if I want to check the SMP amount, I can go into Enter Payments. And if you click the Summary tab, this is where you'll find any statutory maternity pay. So it's £830.78 has been calculated. And if you want to see kind of the breakdown of that figure, you can select it and click on the drop down, which takes you into the maternity pay details. And if you click the entitlement tab, this is what we saw in the employee record. We've got 2 weeks currently due, and that is part of the first 6 weeks at this higher rate. So that is everything set up. Let's give you a quick recap of some of those steps. So that's the information you need: the date the employee wants to start their leave and the MAP-B1 certificate. And then we saw the quick SMP screen. So either from the payroll links or from the employee tasks, where all information can be entered in one place, and you can print that SMP details report. Or alternatively, you can enter this information directly in the employee record. We then had a quick look at the SMP amount within Enter Payments. So it's found on the Summary tab. And if you want to get that drill down to see how many weeks that equates to, you can find that by selecting the amount and clicking on the drop-down arrow to the right. And then if you click the Entitlement tab, that'll show you where it's got to that figure. So now that it's set up, the next thing to consider is how you're going to adjust your employees' other payments. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do this. And the way that you choose will probably depend on whether you have any company maternity pay policies where you need to make up to a higher amount, so you'll be topping up the statutory maternity pay, or whether you only want your employee to receive the statutory pay for the period that they're on maternity leave. So we're going to jump straight back into the demo. So if I bring those slides down, working with the same employee. So I'm going to go back into the Enter Payments screen, and you can see currently I have the employee's full salary of £2,000 entered on the Payments tab. I can check the SMP on the Summary tab. So that's the amount that was calculated, and I'm happy with the calculation. That's 2 weeks from the date they started their maternity leave. And then we need to decide how we're going to adjust the basic. So let's imagine first that this employee should receive their full basic pay. So we have a company maternity pay policy. They receive the full basic for a number of weeks of their maternity leave. And as that is the case, I can use the Make Up Basic option to automatically adjust the basic pay. So whenever you use Make Up Basic, first of all, ensure that you have entered the full salary that you want the employee to receive. So I've entered my £2,000 here on the Payments tab. And if you then go back to Summary, you can click Make Up Basic, and then you'll be prompted to make an adjustment. So it tells you that the hours or number value for salary, in this case, will need to be reduced. And if it's the salary payment that you want to adjust, as it is in my case, you would click Yes to continue. Now, if you have other payments and it hasn't picked the one that you want to adjust, you can click No, and then it will show you any other payments that could be adjusted. But I'm going to click Yes to continue. And as you can see, the employee's total gross pay has now reduced down to £2,000, their usual basic. And it's done that by making an adjustment to the hours or number value, thereby reducing the amount of salary. So this employee altogether is going to get their usual salary amount made up of SMP and then topped up with salary. And we've got the usual deduction for things like pension, tax, and national insurance. Now, if you don't have a company maternity scheme and you only want them to receive the statutory maternity pay for the period that they're off, you will need to do a manual adjustment to their salary. So I'll show you an example of how you might approach that. So in the month of May, for an employee that works Monday to Friday, there are 23 working days. And if I want to pay my employee up to the 17th of May, I want to pay them for 13 of those 23 working days. So one way I could adjust the salary manually, and you might do something similar for starters and leavers, is I can use this little mini calculator for the hours or number. And I could do 13 divided by 23 equals, and if I tab across, you can see that has reduced the salary amount, paying them for the days that they actually worked. Now, like I say, that's just an example. You might have your own way of adjusting salary payments. It could be based on an annualized daily rate, could be based on the number of calendar days that you're paying them for. But whatever method you as a company use, it would be the same principle that applies if you're manually reducing your salary. And then from next month, because they'll be on maternity pay for the full month, I would set the salary amount down to 0. So for this one, it's adding the reduced salary to the statutory pay. It's nearly at their normal gross, because remember, statutory maternity pay is 90% of average weekly earnings. And you can see the deductions have been calculated as well. Now, one other thing that you may need to adjust, particularly if the employee is earning less than they usually would, if you don't have a company maternity scheme, is the employer's pension contribution. So in most cases, usually you would need to continue to contribute an employer pension contribution based on the usual wage before they go on maternity leave. But if you're unsure on the rules of your pension scheme, you should always check this out with your pension provider. Now, currently, because I've reduced the employee's pay, if I click on the employer's button here at the bottom, the pension has slightly reduced as well. So if I want that to be fixed at the amount I usually contribute to the employee's pension, what I can do is I can go into the employee record and then go on to the pensions tab. I can click onto manage schemes and edit this employee's scheme. And then we could change them to a fixed amount for the employer contribution. And I know that the usual contribution from the employer for this employee is £44.40. So we could do that for the period of time that they're on lower wages, if required by our pension scheme. And as you can see now, the employer's pension is that fixed amount. So we've done a couple of adjustments there. I just want to show you a few reports before we finalize payroll. So if I go into pre-update reports, I've got a pay slip added to my favorites, so we'll take a look at that first. So as you can see, we've got the salary that we manually adjusted. So this is a lower salary amount, and this one was representing the work done up to the last day of work. And then the statutory payment will always have its own separate line. So this is labeled parental pay, and this is the amount of SMP. So pension contributions are shown here, tax and the NI, and then all of our year-to-date values as well. You can also view the total parental payments on the payment summary part 1 report. So I've only got this employee highlighted, but just to show you, there is a parental payments column. So that's another way you can easily check how much SMP you've paid out. So what I'll do is I'll just complete payroll for all of my employees. So you'd run your payslips and pre-update reports. You would update the records. And then you would do your full payment submission in the usual way. So this full payment submission doesn't take into account any amounts that you're reclaiming. You will need to do a separate submission at the end of the month, which we'll cover in the next section. But this is just your usual FPS and the total liability based on the payments that you've processed. So you would send that in the usual way, and that is our pay run complete. So just to recap that part of the demo. So we've been looking at adjusting your employees' payments. Make up basic is the option you could use if you want your employee to receive their usual basic pay. So if you have a company maternity scheme where you're going to pay them full pay for a period of time, or even half pay, if there's a specific amount you want them to receive, you can type that amount in and you can use make up basic to automatically adjust the basic pay. Or if you don't have a company scheme, the other thing we showed you was doing manual adjustments. So very similar to how you deal with a starter or a leaver, when they're not being paid for a full month or full week, you would work out how much you need to pay them for the days or the hours that they've worked. And one other note is the pension adjustments. So employer contributions are usually still based on the employee's normal pay during statutory maternity leave. So if you need to make an adjustment to that, you can enter a fixed amount as the pension contribution, and always check with your pension provider or HMRC if you need clarification on what you should be doing there. So last bit of the process is reclaiming the statutory payment, and this is something that you would do at the end of the tax month when it's time to make your payment to HMRC. And to reclaim a statutory payment, you're effectively offsetting it against the tax and the national insurance that you'd be paying over to HMRC. So there's a report that works out your liability, the P32 report, that hopefully you're all familiar with and you're running at the end of each month. And this report will show you any amounts that you're reclaiming, including the NI compensation if you're a small employer, you qualify for small employers relief, and then it will factor in that reclaim amount when it works out the amount payable. Now, because the reclaim isn't included in your FPS, you will need to submit an EPS with details of what you've reclaimed for the tax year to date, so that HMRC can then know to expect the correct amount in the payment. So they won't think that you've underpaid because you've reclaimed a statutory payment because you've reported the amounts that you're reclaiming. So I just want to show you both of those processes. So if we just jump back to the demo. So first thing we'll run is the P32 report. So you can find this from the payroll links. It's a really quick way of getting to it, or it's also in your reports in the period end folder. So I'm running it for tax month 2. This is the May tax month. And then if I just zoom in slightly, you can see it gives us total values for the PAYE income tax, the gross national insurance, and then it goes on to show things that I'm reclaiming. So I'm still claiming employment allowance in May, and for the maternity pay, I'm getting the full amount back that I paid out, so 100% of that plus 3% of NI compensation. So that means that the total amount that I'm actually paying is just under £2,500, because that takes into account what I've reclaimed this month as well. Now, because we've reclaimed a statutory payment, we do need to send an EPS at the end of the month just to report those values. The employment allowance has already been reported at the start of the year if you're claiming that, but the monthly EPS is what you need to send in this case. So I could print that or save it for my own records, make sure I make that payment by the due date, and then to send the EPS, again, it's a payroll link. So it's really handy that it's just here under the payroll tasks, employer payment summary, or alternatively, you go to your e-submissions tasks and you can run it from here. Now to send this, you would select the reason it's being submitted. So in this case, we are recovering statutory payments. It then shows the tax month the submission will relate to. So this will be tax month 2. And then it shows the year-to-date values for statutory pay you've reclaimed. So this is my first reclaim of this tax year. So it's showing the values I saw on the P32. But next month when I do this, it will show the cumulative totals. So if I click onto next, I don't need to enter any CIS deductions suffered or apprenticeship levy values. And when I click finish, it's then going to submit the EPS. So this is your submission screen. Click on to continue, where you can view your gateway registration and company details. And then a summary of the submission just confirms the tax year it relates to. And some references, so accounts office reference, tax district and reference. And we would just go ahead and click submit. So that has now been sent. And there's a link to view and print the submission log. It can also be viewed in the e-submissions log after the event, and that is all reported to HMRC. I just need to make sure I pay the correct amount when it's time to make that payment. So that there was the month-end process. Run your P32 to see the amounts that you've reclaimed, and it also shows you the amount payable. And then the EPS is what you submit to report the amounts you're reclaiming. So that's processing and reclaiming statutory maternity pay. But I do want to finish the webinar with some top tips on troubleshooting SMP. So the usual problems that people come across is that there's either no SMP calculating or the amount of SMP doesn't look right. So first one I want to mention, the first cause of no SMP being calculated is where an employee has received SMP before for a previous child, and there is still some SMP information recorded in the year-to-date values. So there's two ways to get around this problem. So you will be prompted if there are already SMP details entered if you go into the quick SMP screen. And if you know that you're setting it up for a new child, you can click yes, and that will completely remove all of the previous information. Or you can go into the year-to-date values and you can find the number of weeks paid for the previous child, and you can manually set that to 0. So I'm going to give you a demo on this one because it is so common. So let's just jump back to the demo. I'm going to set my next pay date, which will be the 30th of June. I'm going to select a different employee, and I'm going to use the option for recording maternity. Now, whenever this message pops up that you've already paid it to this employee and do we want to record details for a second child, if you're ever unsure, the safest option is by clicking no. So I'm going to click no just to see what that message is talking about, and I can see yes, this is information for the previous child that arrived back in 2017. So once I've viewed that information and I'm sure that I want to clear it, I can go back into recording maternity, and then I've got the option of clicking yes, and that will remove the previous year-to-date values. So I'm not going to click yes just yet because I want to show you where they are stored. So going into the employee record, onto the employment tab, if you click YTD values and check your statutory payments, if there's been SMP paid for a previous child, it will store the number of weeks paid, and that doesn't clear down after year end because often maternity leave can span more than one tax year. So we could kind of get around this by setting that to 0 manually in the year-to-date values. But if we go through recording maternity, because I'm sure I want to clear the details, I can click yes. And that will then allow me to enter the details for the next child. So due dates, last day of work, etc. And that will then correctly calculate for the second child. So really common one, that one. So thought I'd show you a way of kind of avoiding that problem or solving it if you wanted to go into the year-to-date values and to clear that manually. Some other reasons why no SMP would calculate could be if average earnings are too low. So I would suggest that you go into the recording maternity screen to check the calculated average earnings. And if it is less than £123 per week, it means the employee doesn't qualify. And there's also a setting for manual statutory pay calculations. So that's found in the employee record. So you need to clear that setting to have it calculate automatically. Or if you go into the quick SMP screen, it will tell you if that setting is selected and ask you if you want to clear it. So those are some common causes of no SMP. The other one that crops up is where the SMP amount is different to what's expected, often less than what's expected. So a couple of things to check here. First of all, check that you've entered the correct process date. So this should be the date the employee receives their pay. And then keep in mind that statutory payments will only calculate up to that date. They won't cover any dates in the future. So if, for example, your monthly pay date was the 25th of the month, but usually you would pay wages up to the end of the month, when it comes to statutory maternity pay, the first payment to that employee would be slightly less than what you'd expect because it's only calculating up to the 25th. But then the last payment of SMP to that employee would make up the difference. It would be slightly higher because it would cover the last few days of the previous month. So first of all, check that you have entered the correct process date, and then keep in mind that it calculates up to that date. And the other one, if you notice that the standard rate of SMP is less than £184.03 per week, it could be that 90% of average weekly earnings is also less than that. So remember, the standard rate is the lower of 90% of average weekly earnings, or £184.03 for the current tax year. So with that, it does bring us to the end of the webinar. So we're going to keep the session open just to give you a chance to ask any final questions that you might have, maybe read through the Q&A and copy and paste any answers you want to keep. I'll quickly go through some of the further support that's available. So starting with some upcoming webinars. So we've got webinars taking place throughout this month, including shared parental pay on Tuesday morning, get your payroll done this time next week, a new session on variance reporting, just a half-hour session on the 22nd of May, and finishing with another statutory payment, sick pay, made simple, on Thursday the 30th. So you can find the full details at sage.co.uk/webinars or by following the links on your handout. Our online help centre is always available with the information you need. So if you do have a query, you can click any of the help icons in your program, and that will bring up an in-product version of the help centre, or in your browser you can go to sage.co.uk/help and then follow the links for Sage 50 Payroll. So really useful if you're looking up an error message, if you want to read one of our support guides. You'll find a link to webinars towards the top where you can see our upcoming sessions, and if you do need to contact the support team, you'll find all of their contact details on the help centre. And lastly, Sage University is another great free resource for you. You can sign up for your profile at sageu.com. And once that's created, you can find your way to the Sage 50 Payroll Learning Path to complete e-learning courses. You can do the official online certification, and you can also complete a range of bite-sized learning courses whenever you get the chance to brush up on your payroll knowledge. So sageu.com, check it out if you haven't already done so. So that does bring us to the end of the webinar content, but as I say, we are going to stick around just to make sure that we've answered your questions in the Q&A. Remember, if you'd like a copy of the handouts, they are still available to be downloaded from that piece of paper icon. And if you do want to keep any of the Q&A, make sure you do copy and paste them into another document. So I will shortly go on mute just to help out with any of the outstanding questions. And once we're ready to wrap up, I will be back to say goodbye. If you're leaving us now, thanks so much for joining us at the webinar. Look out for a follow-up email arriving later today with a link to the recording of today's session. And if you wouldn't mind completing the survey when you exit the webinar, really appreciate that. If you let us know what you thought of the session, as it helps us to keep them relevant and to improve them in the future. So I'm just going to go on mute briefly, but I will be back when it's time to say goodbye. So I'll speak to you soon. Hi again, everyone, and thank you so much for sending those questions through. I think we're just getting the final answer out now. So you've certainly kept us busy today. We are unfortunately out of time, so I am going to wrap things up there. Thanks once again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your week, and maybe we'll see you on some of our other webinars in the future, but it's goodbye for now.